Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. This week I'm going to show you how to build Whac-a-mole in super simple JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. No styling, no canvas, because if you are a fan of my channel, you know that I don't really like either. I don't really like to style these video games because I really do want you to be able to take the game and make it your own and really give it your own extra flair and pizzazz, because I do want to see your games, so please do share them with me on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. I just really love to see what you have built. But before we get started, a little word from our sponsors who have made this video happen. HarperDB is a scalable database that's improving app performance and development with solutions like hybrid cloud. With SQL on JSON, you no longer have to pick a database based on the structure of your data. HarperDB runs anywhere and ingests any type of data at scale. You can spin up a powerful free instance through the HarperDB Studio, where you can easily manage both self-hosted and HarperDB cloud-managed instances. The Studio includes resources like example code, SDKs, and drivers. Make sure to check it out using the link in the description. It is a track link so they can manage this ad's performance, so give it a click and help me out in being their favorite. Okay, for those of you who don't know how to play Whac-a-mole, this is a really good game as we're going to be doing a lot of timing events. So if you're currently learning JavaScript and want to practice your timing events, this is definitely the video for you. We're going to be building a countdown timer that counts down to 60 seconds, from 60 seconds. And in that 60 seconds, you have to hit as many moles as possible, okay? Which are going to add to your score. So that is it in a nutshell. This is what we're going to build by the end of this tutorial. I hope you're excited. I know I am. So let's do it. Okay, so first things first, here is my file setup in which I have some standard HTML boilerplate, making sure that my style sheet has the correct path to my actual style sheet, which is here. And same for the script tag to pick up my JavaScript, making sure that the path, the relative path, is the same. So the first thing I'm actually going to do for my game of Whac-a-mole is make a grid. So above the script tag, make sure it's above the script tag. I'm just going to make a div that has the class of grid. And in here, well, I'm just going to put in 9 divs as I want my Whac-a-mole grid to be 3 by 3. And then I'm going to give each of them a class of square. I could technically add these in JavaScript, but you know, it's not that many. So I'm just going to put in the 9 divs, each with their own ID. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This is so we can identify each one, but I want each one to look the same. So I'm going to style all of them as squares, and that's why I have chosen to do it this way. So there we go. That is our grid. We of course need to style it so we can see it. While we are here, I'm also going to add a H2 tag for the score. So I actually want my score to show up here. I'm going to hardcore code it as 0 and just give this ID of score so we can pick it out later with our JavaScript. I also want to have another H2 tag that is going to tell us how much time we have left. So I want the game to count down from 60 seconds. And I'm just going to put time left. And you know what? I'm also going to give them a label. So quite simply, I'm just going to make it really basic. Please style this better than the way I'm doing it right now. I just want to give you the sort of skeleton to make your own. So your score and then time left. Okay, this is looking good. Let's style it up so we can see it in our browser. So in here, I'm just going to pick out the grid. And then the grid, well, I'm going to use display flex, and I'll show you why in a bit. Actually, let's get rid of it so I can show you. So I'm just going to get rid of it. For now, I'm just going to give this a width. So let's say each of our squares is going to have let's make each square 200 pixels wide and high. So which means this will be 600 pixels. And give this a height of 600 pixels. So that will look like a square. And then let's, we could give it a border, or we can give each square a border. So let's do that. So every square with the class of every div, sorry, with the class of square. We know we're looking for divs with classes because we put the dot. Same for grid. We're looking for a class, a div, or an element with the class of grid to style. So let's make each square. We decided that each square we want to be 200 pixels with 200 pixels. So height 200 pixels, width 200 pixels. And then I'm actually going to give each one, let's give each one a border. I'm just going to go border color and be really simple of black. Okay, so this might be a problem because I don't know how thick the border is, in which case our grid might look a bit strange, but let's go ahead and see. So I'm going to copy the path and I'm just going to put it into our browser. So here is our grid. You can see all the squares inside it. However, they don't seem to have the border color. That's because we need to give it a border style of solid. We can actually maybe just change this. It's too much for me. I can do border solid black 1 pixel. So that's another alternative. It's just like a shorthand of what I wrote before. And I'm also assigning the border a width so that we can know how big the border is going to be. So now if I refresh, we now get the 9 divs stacked over each other. What we need is for them to snake over each other so that they can fit in. And I could do so by adding display flex to my grid. So now if I refresh it, see, all the squares will try fit into my grid. So if I go on grid, there's the grid, and they're all trying to fit in it. I want them to stack over each other like a snake. So I can do that by adding flex wrap. And there we go. Now they don't fit. The third one isn't going here, and that's because we need to make the grid fit the border too. So what will that be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So width 606, and height 606. And there we go. The squares now fit perfectly into my grid. So this is looking good. If I want to see grid, square with ID 3, it's that one. 4 is there, 5 is there, 6 is there, 7, 8, 9. It's literally snaking around. Perfect. Let's carry on. Okay, now I also want, I'm going to go ahead and make the mole. For the moment, I'm just going to give it a background color of blue, but obviously we want to switch this out later. So we actually probably want like a mole image. I'll show you how to do that. But for now, I'm just going to have the class of mole to be blue. So for example, if I add the class of mole here and refresh, you will see that the third square has a class of mole, so that square has turned blue. We can even see it when we inspect the elements. So that's great. Let's just pretend that's our mole for now until we get an image to put there. Next up, let's do some logic. So let's move on to our app.js file. Okay, so actually I'm just going to remove the mole class from here because we're going to add it with our JavaScript. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually select all the squares so we can work with them in our JavaScript file. So I'm going to do that by using the document.querySelector. So I'm not making this up. Document.querySelector all. So that's a JavaScript method that will essentially help us look for anything with the class name, so dot of square, So we're going to search for all those and we're going to store it as squares. Squares. Okay, so we're finding all the squares and we're storing them under squares. Now, even though we don't have it because I removed it, I'm actually also going to store the mole. So I'm going to go document.querySelector, not all, because there's only going to be one mole at any time. And I'm going to search for the class of mole. So now we have our squares, we can work with them. And then now we have our mole, if it's on the page, that we can work with. Okay, we have two more things to pick out so we can do them later, and that is the element with the ID of time left. So once again, document. I could use querySelector or I could use get element by ID. But just so you know, in querySelector, if we're searching for an element with an ID, we need to use hash and then the name. So this is like an ID. We're searching for an element with an ID of time left. And let's store this as time left. And then finally, one more thing, and that's the score. So this thing right here, we need to get this element so that we can manipulate this with our JavaScript. So once again, I would get document, querySelector, and then look for the ID of score. And let's save this as score. Or maybe, yeah, let's just save a score, that's fine. Great. So let's start off with the result as 0. Even though we've hard-coded it, we need to tell our JavaScript the result that we start with is 0. And we'll do the time a little bit later. Let's actually focus on getting the game to work. So I'm going to write a function called random square. So we want to get a random square to put our mole. Now in here for each square, so I'm going to grab all the squares and using the JavaScript method of forEach, so that is a JavaScript method, I am going to get the class name. So I could put I here, I could put whatever we want, I could put square. So we could actually use square, maybe that makes more sense. So for each square in our squares array, I essentially want to get the square and I want to go class list, so that is the JavaScript property, and I want to remove the mole if he exists on any of the squares. So we have a fresh slate to start with. So that is what is happening here. I'm getting each square, and for each of the squares, I'm removing the class of mole. So that's the first step that we want to do in our function before we start adding a mole randomly. So I'm going to write let random position, and then I'm going to use, so once again, I'm going to go into my squares array, and I am going to pass through. So if I pass through a 0 into my squares array, it would literally get me that first square. If I pass a 1, well then I'm talking to the second square in my array. I need to pass through a random number in here, okay? I want to pass through a random number from essentially 0 to 8, because I want a random index from 0 to 8 because there's 9 squares and we start counting from 0. So I'm going to do this by passing through the JavaScript method of math random like this, and then multiplying it by 9. But I'm also going to use math floor to round whatever that number is down. So for example, if I console, so now if I console log random position and look in here, I need to actually call that function. So random square, random position before initialization. Okay, that's because I console logged it up here. Whoops. There we go. Refresh. I'm going to get literally a random square each time with an ID from 1 to 9. Okay? There we go. So that is it. That's what is happening here. If I actually console logged just this, you will see that once again, I am getting a random number from essentially 0 to 8. Let's check that. Math, random, my trusty MDN. Okay, math random returns a function from a floating point in the range from 0 to less than 1. Okay, so in this case, we multiplied it by 9, so 0 to less than 9. So that is exactly what numbers we're getting back, and we're rounding it down. So that's what we're doing. See, no matter how many times I refresh this, we'll never get anything above 8 because we're rounding down. Okay, so 8 is going to be the highest, and that makes sense because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We only go up to the 8th index. So hopefully that makes sense. Have a read of this from MDN if you're not sure and have a play around with it, but that's exactly what we are doing here. Great. So I'm just going to get rid of this for now. Okay. Now, whatever random position, we should probably have random square. I'm going to have random square because essentially what we're getting back is a random square as we saw by the first console log. So for whatever random square we have, I'm going to use classList.add mole class. So once again, we should now get a blue square in a random position. So that's our mole. Every time you refresh the page, putting itself in a random square. Let's carry on. So I'm happy with that, but I actually want to put this on a timer. So I want this to be on a timer. So what I'm actually going to do is, instead of just having the function like this, I'm going to write this in another function so we can attach it to a button if we wish. Move mole. And then I'm going to put let timer ID equal null because we need to actually stop this timer interval from moving. And I'm going to use the JavaScript method of setInterval to move the mole. So I'm just going to put random square to generate a random square. And let's say every 500 milliseconds. So this is so now I don't need this here, and nothing will happen if I refresh the page. However, if we invoke the function or call the function, which is why I want to do this in a function, because you now have the option to attach this to a button if you wish, right? Because if I do this now, it will just start on the page load. See? I'm not doing anything. We are getting a random square light up with a mole every 500 milliseconds. So that's some extra work for you if you want it. At the moment, I'm just calling the function on the page load, but you can attach it to a button if you wish. So that's working. It is essentially on a timer, and we can use this timer, which is why I've done it like this. I could have just done that, but because it's on a timer, we can actually use this timer to stop our mole again in our button if we wish. So that's optional for you. That's why I've put it there. Cool. So the next thing I want to do is actually listen out for if we hit the mole, because we want to get a point each time we hit the mole. So I'm going to do this up here. And now I'm going to grab the squares, and for each square, for each ID in the square, I am going to get the ID and use add. Again, this could just be square, so let's just maybe put this for square. It makes more sense. For each square in our squares array, I'm going to add an event listener to listen out if we put mouse down. So each time we click on the square, and then I'm just going to put a function here. So I'm passing through the event and then a function of what's to happen if I click the square. And if the square ID equals the square that is the random square. So let's actually save that. I'm actually going to put, so we want to save something. I'm going to put hit position, and then I'm going to get the random squares ID. So I'm literally getting the ID of the square. So I'm getting this thing right here, and that's how we can do it. So I'm getting the ID of the random square, and I'm saving it to hit position. So perhaps I'm just going to put let hit position and leave it as blank. If the square ID equals whatever the hit position is at that point in time, then I want to get the result and add one to the result. Cool. I also want to display it in our score. So score, let's do text content or inner HTML, whatever you want, equals the result. Okay. And then I also want to make the hit position, oops, so clear it out, hit position equals null again. Okay. Cool. If I could just spell that right, hit position. So this is looking good. So amazing. So that's what happens if we hit a mole. Let's see if that has worked. Now we've got that working. We are adding a score each time we hit it. The last thing we need to do is actually get our timer to stop working. So let's do that. I'm gonna do that below here, and then slow it down so we can see it a bit because it's way too fast. So I'm going to write a new function called countdown. And then in here, so in my function, well, with each time we invoke this, so I'm going to put this once again, because I'm not attaching it to anything, I could just put setInterval. So I'm just going to put this down here and call this let countdown timer ID. So we can stop it if we want, equals setInterval. And then I'm going to put this on a set interval. So I'm literally going to pass through the countdown function. And I want the countdown and function to invoke every 1000 milliseconds. So it would be like 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. And each time I want something to happen. And with that, I want to get the current time. So let's actually write let current time equals 60. So I want to get the current time, and I just want to minus 1 from it. And then I actually want to display that. I want to display that in the time left. So time left, text, content, current time. Okay. So that's really it. If, however, current time equals 0, so like we get to the end, I want to clear the timer, so clear interval, countdown timer ID. Okay, so I want to clear this, and then maybe let's get an alert that says game over, your final score is, and then the result. So that is looking good. Let's have a go. So to make this a little bit faster, I'm just going to change this to 10. Let's see how we do in 10 seconds. So 0. You can see the timer's working. We're clicking on the mole. We're getting points. And then as soon as we get to 0, game over, your final score is 9. We could do with a space there, but that looks good. Awesome. You can see this is still moving around. We can actually stop that thanks to this timer ID. So I'm just going to move this out so it's global. and we can use it here. So we also want to clear interval timer ID. Let's try that now. Once again, let's click, 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 click. Got a score of 5, got a score of, okay. Game over, you'll find some scores 5, 0, and it stops moving. So there we have it. We have now built our game of Whac-a-mole. If you are interested in how to get an image, let me show you that very quickly. So I'm just going to use this Whac-a-mole from my GitHub. Feel free to take him. I've already pre-made him to be 200 by 200 pixels. So let's just download that. I'm going to save image. And let's save them as short mole. That sounds good. In downloads. And then I'm simply just gonna very basically drag him and put him in here. So there he is. And then in my style sheet, instead of having background color blue, I'm gonna have background image. And then I'm going to put URL and then the path to my mole. So it's in the root. So I just put mole JPEG, because it's a JPEG. And then I'm going to put background size cover. So let's have a look at that. And there we go. We have our little mole moving around. So, oops, game over, final score is 3. Let's fix that space. Okay, score is, put a space there. And let's make it move faster. So let's get a random square every 500 milliseconds again. And let's change the current time to start with 60 seconds. So once again, boom, boom. This is more realistic. You can of course add levels. You can make them go as fast as you want. Like this is really fast. You will see the score adding and you'll see the time left. So that is it. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial on how to make Whac-a-mole without canvas and practice your timer skills. Thanks very much for watching and I will see you soon.